guys, it's Rogway here, and I am back now with our shooting tutorial, and we just looked at classes, and I know it might be a little confusing how those work, but hopefully you can wrap your head around kind of the basics of it. We get into it a lot more later on, but basically what we're trying to do, or what we have done, is created a class that this symbol is linked to. And now what we can do is we can have our character, in this case, generate these symbols so that we can have them appear when we need them. And in order to do this, we can actually close our ActionScript file. We're not going to need it anymore. In order for this to happen, in order for this to work, we are going to need to create an array. Before we create an array, let's set up the actual button that will create the object that is going to fire, which is our bullet. Okay, so let's do that first. So we're going to go to Window, we're going to go to Actions, and we're going to head over to our main sort of action area here, which in my case all happens on Scene 1 Actions. And if you remember from before, we had all of our key listeners happening here. And the one that we're going to use for the shooting in this game is going to be the Shift key. All right, so let's create something that's going to happen when the Shift key is hit. So let's just copy this chunk right here. Copy that. Hopefully I got the right amount this time, not like last part. And we're gonna say I'm just doing this to save me some time. I'm gonna get rid of all this anyways. We'll get rid of these 3 lines. If keyboard's shift, the Shift key is pressed, what happens? Well, we're gonna tell it to run a function that doesn't exist yet. We're going to call it FireBullet. Okay, and FireBullet will be what it's going to basically use to generate a bullet that will travel across the screen. All right, again, based on the code in our ActionScript class, bullet. Okay, so if the Shift key is pressed, FireBullet function will take place. So let's scroll down to the bottom. I'm going to add it to the bottom. And again, we got to be careful that we're within our proper sort of brackets here. I'm going to take this last function. I'm going to copy it. I'm lazy, so I like to copy existing things that are already there and just kind of edit them. We're going to call it FireBullet. Okay? Now we're going to look at a few new things here. Okay, because we are going to do some fancy coding to make this work. So we got FireBullet started. First, we're going to introduce a new variable, and it's going to be called NewBullet. Okay, and we are going to tell it with the colon key. We're going to tell it to use bullet. Okay, so bullet. Right here, bullet as its source. And we're going to equals a new bullet. Okay? So we are creating a variable called NewBullet using bullet as a reference, and this will equal or create a new bullet. It's going to generate a new bullet. Okay? Then what we're going to do is we're going to use this command, stage dot add child of the new bullet. Okay? And what this will do is it will add a copy, basically, of the bullet symbol to the stage. All right? And we are going to tell it that the new bullet should appear at the X of our Mario character, and it should also appear, the new bullet should also appear at the Y of Mario's Y as well. So basically, we want this new bullet object to appear exactly where our Mario character is. Okay, so hopefully, again, that makes sense. So what did we do? We added a key code detection for the shift key now. And when the shift key is pressed, we're telling it to fire bullet. Fire bullet is telling it to set up a new variable called new bullet that is using the bullet symbol and action script as its new bullet object. We are adding a child, which basically is a fancy way of saying a copy of new bullet, to our stage. Okay, we're making a copy of it and we are putting it directly on our Mario character. Now remember, as soon as that object gets added, the action script here takes over and that bullet should travel across the stage. All right, so let's test that. Let's go control and test and let's see what happens. And we have a problem. Extra characters. I knew that might happen. Let me just kill this test window. Okay, no errors. I'm just going to jump. And if I hit the shift key, no, nothing happens. Okay, nothing. All right, so we have a problem with our code somewhere here. Something is not working correctly. And we're going to have to kind of take a look here and see what happened here. Why is it not working? Did I miss a semicolon? No, I did not. Did I miss anything here? No, not as far as I can tell. It looks like everything is correct. I'm just seeing if I missed anything. I don't see it. It looks like everything is correct. I'm just going to check it very, very carefully. Make sure there... Ooh, I see a potential problem. Yes. I think I did not close that properly. If you look at this if statement, it closes here. That one didn't close. That would leave an extra one there. So I think that might be our problem. Let's test it. Yep, there it is. Do you see the fireballs? Now they're coming out of Mario's shoes. That's because the X and Y value of Mario, his registration point or his dot, is at the ground. If you remember, we set that up before to be at the ground so we could detect for the gravity, for the ground, the collision detection with the ground. Okay, so that is going to be easy to fix. We just go down to our new function that we created, and instead of telling it to go right to Mario's Y, let's say minus 15. Okay, so rather than being right on the ground, we're going to go Mario's Y minus 15, which should move it up a little bit. Let's test that out. Yes, now you can see that that goes from the center of his body, which looks much better. Still not perfect, but you can see how that responds pretty well. Every single time we hit the shift key, it is firing a bullet, which is exactly what we wanted. Now, here's where it gets tricky. We want to be able to track every single bullet that is fired by Mario. We want to make sure that Mario's bullets are tracked, and we also want to check to see if it hits something. All right, and this is where we get into a very, I want to say, pretty complex part of programming called arrays. All right, an array, I want you to think of it as a container that can hold multiple pieces of information. So if we're talking about the bullets, an array will store all of those bullets that are created within it. All right, so think of it as a container that can hold a lot of objects. The way we set that up is up at the top of our code, we're going to create a variable. We'll call it a bullet array. Hopefully that makes sense. A bullet array. And the type of variable is an array object. Okay? Excuse me. So we've created an array. And under our event listeners, right at the start of our script, let's just tell it that a bullet array, okay, so the variable a bullet array right now equals a new array. Okay, basically telling it that it's a brand new array, there's nothing in it. It's a brand new array. So when this starts, we have nothing in it. Okay? Now we need to actually store the bullets inside of this array. Okay, we want to actually push every single bullet that's generated into this array. So how do we do that? Well, let's go down to where we create the bullets. That's inside of the fire bullet function. In order to add a bullet or any object to an array, here's what we have to do. We have to put in some code that says a bullet array. Okay, so that's the array variable we created. Dot push. Okay, we're telling it to push the new bullet, okay, which is the variable we created up here. We are pushing a new bullet into this array. So what am I trying to say, or what does that mean? This array, every time fire bullet runs, it will keep track of every new bullet that is being created because it is pushing it into this array, into this container that stores that information. And if we want to see how many bullets we have inside of that array, if we want to actually track how many bullets are created, we can use the trace function, which will send some sort of output to our output window. It's a great way to test. We can say trace a bullet array dot length. And what that's going to tell us, the length of the array is basically a number that tells us how many objects are within that array. So if we think of this in a simple sort of way, let me just space this out a bit. It's easier for me to show you what's happening. As each bullet gets pushed into the array, it should add 1 to the length every time we create a bullet, which means that this number in our output should go up by 1 every time we hit the shift key, because every time we hit the shift key, we're creating a new bullet. And that new bullet is getting pushed into the array. So let's test that. Control, test. Right now we don't see anything. This is your output window, by the way. But watch, as I start making fireballs, look at the numbers happening here. It is telling us how many objects are stored right now in the array. And we're already up to like 40 almost here. There we go. So it is storing all of those bullets, all of those fireballs into this array. And now what we can do, once we have them stored in an array, we can actually detect whether they hit something. Now, I have to tell you, because this tutorial was built without an array in mind when I originally did it, it's not going to work with our existing enemies. And the reason is our enemies right now are all one symbol. They're all moving together. we would have to create individual enemies. However, we can test to see if this works. Okay, so I will show you how to do that. What I'm going to do on my stage, I'm just going to close my actions for a second. I'm going to close my compiler, and I'm going to go to my timeline, and I'm going to go to a layer that has nothing on it. Let's go to, it really doesn't matter what layer. I'm going to use the oval tool. I'm going to set the color to something like, yeah, red, sure. And I'm going to just put a circle / oval. You know what? That's not good. That's not good. I want it to move with the background. So I'm actually going to, you know what? I'm going to unlock the background, go into the background, create that object on the background. Let's say, oops, let's just say somewhere, you know what? Let's make a layer for it. We'll call it bullet test. Okay, bullet test. I'm going to create an object that we want our bullets to be able to hit. So there it is. We got to convert it to a symbol. It's going to be a movie clip. Let's call it hit test. Okay, so hit test. That's what it's going to be. We can leave the registration in the middle. We're going to hit OK. We've now got it on there. Okay, I'll just lock these other layers, not that it matters. We now have an object for it to hit. Let's go back out. Now let's go to our code, actions. And remember, if you remember back to what we did here, we had all of our main functions running within our game loop. So let's create a new function within the game loop called detect enemy hit. Now again, I used a simple circle, but this could be a movie clip. This could be basically anything. It could be a sprite. It could be an animation. Whatever your enemies are going to be. This is just a simple test. And now above, let's put it above the fire bullet function. We'll create a function now called detect enemy hit. There it is. Okay, so it's part of the game loop, detect enemy hit, and now we're going to actually tell it what to do. Now, I don't know if you remember this from a few tutorials ago. We're going to create a for statement, which means that this is going to repeat over and over again, okay, for I equals 0. This is going to be a little tricky, but I less than a bullet array, which means this is going to run as long as there's something in the bullet array, okay? As long as I is less than the length of the bullet array, this is going to run. Okay, and then we're going to tell it that I is going to increase by 1. Basically what this is going to do is it's going to cycle through. It's going to cycle through our existing our existing array until it detects a hit. And this will only run as long as there's something in the array to actually check. Okay? If the array is at 0, then this won't run. Only once it has something to check. And we're going to just put a little statement here for what's going to happen when it checks. Well, it's going to do this. We're going to create a variable. We're going to call it the current bullet. Okay, so this is the current bullet. And once again, it is going to reference the bullet symbol and action script. And it is going to equal, here's another new thing for you guys to see, a bullet array. And we're going to use these brackets this time. slightly different, I. So this variable for the current bullet that it's checking is going to be I, which is this number up here, of our array. Okay, it is going to check the bullets in the array for something to happen. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Remember, every time we put a bullet in the array, it adds 1 to the array, to the length of the array. Here we are telling it for I, whatever number that is in the bullet array, it's going to check for. And so if, let's use if, we're familiar with this already, background dot hit test. I forgot something very important. Dot hit test object current bullet, which is what we just created. So if our if our current bullet hits the hit test object, and this is what I forgot to do. I'm just going to slide this out of the way for a second. Maybe you guys caught it, but we got to go back into our background. I forgot to name my instance. Okay, so I'm going to go to properties for that, and I'm going to call it hit test. Okay, we have to name our instances. Very important. Let's go back to our code. So if background hit test hits current bullet, so if the current bullet hits the background hit test object, let's say that the background hit test object that we created disappears. So the visibility of that object becomes false. So it turns off. Oops, I guess I should put it that right, hit test. So hopefully this makes sense. It's going to cycle through all of the pieces inside of the array. This is basically telling it that as long as there's something in the length of the array, I want you to continue to cycle through. This is telling it that if the bullet that it's looking at or that it's detecting for, okay, equals the bullet in the array, if there is a hit detected between the hit test object and the current bullet that we just created, we want to turn the hit test object's visibility to false. Otherwise, the bullet will just keep on traveling. Actually, the bullet's going to keep traveling anyways, but let's just take a look at that. So let's go control test. So as you can see, when I hit the shift key, we still have the trace on, so we can still see how many objects are in the array. I'm just going to jump over to, there's the red block. If I hit it, perfect. You saw as soon as that object hit it, it disappeared. All right, now that could have been a frame. It could have been a go-to frame where it plays like a death sequence, or it could have been something else, but I just told it to disappear. Let's also tell it that the bullet, the current bullet, also should disappear so that it doesn't look like it keeps going through. All right, so let's test that. And shoot, and the bullet disappears. Now you can see the object hasn't actually left the stage. It's still there. It's just invisible. We just turned off the visibility. So what we could also do here is we could tell it that the background hit test object, okay, let's say it's y-axis, equals, let's say, -50. All right, so it's going to go -50. So basically 50, or we could even set it to 0. So it just actually sits at the top of the stage, which won't interfere with anything anyways. Let's test that. Here we go. Boom. And now it's gone. Well, it's not actually gone. It's actually sitting up here. And we can test that. If I shoot it. Oh! You know what? It must be right. Oh, because it was centered, it must be sitting right on the edge. So anyways, you can see how that works. Arrays are a pretty tricky thing. They do take a little bit of thinking about how they work, but ultimately it's the best way to create multiple objects. Objects that are going to have different properties or are going to have different detection, for example, in this case, with other objects that we have generated. It's the best way. Actually, I mean, it's probably one of the only ways to do it properly. All right, so save that. Try to implement it in your own game if you can. Again, we are going to go into this in much more detail, but for now, hopefully that made sense. Be sure to save your file. Till next time, thanks for watching.